and welcome all to this session about top 10 things people mess up with Canvas Power Apps. And these things are ones I have been messing around. My colleagues have messing around. I have seen plenty of Power Apps consultants that have been messing around with these things, and also people from customer organizations. They have been starting to build Canvas Power Apps, and these are the things I usually notice that they are somehow messing around. Let's see, where's my here. First, thanks for all the sponsors and partners, and please make sure you visit Bonaire virtual bar and stay here after the sessions, because there will be a raffle, and I'm sure there will be some very cool prizes also in the raffle after the sessions. Shortly about myself. My name is Timo Pertilä. I work as a consultant in a company called Forward Forever, and I live here in Finland. I am also Microsoft MVP in business applications area, and I have been working with these Power Apps since 2016. So from the very beginning of the story of Power Apps. And let's start. First thing people mess up with Power Apps is actually think that they are not messing up at all. They just ignore those. So people might think that these Power Apps, it's, you maybe have played with Flow, and Flow is pretty easy to learn, and then you look a little bit about the Power Apps, Canvas Power Apps, and think that okay, this has some learning curve, and maybe I pass these things. But please don't do that. If you have any idea about yourself, or your colleague have some ideas or requirements about the applications, and you notice that this is something that you think that this can be built by using Power Apps, then you definitely should do that, or even try to do that, because at the end, these non-existing applications, they don't have any value at all. So if you have some idea about the applications, and you know that this is something that can be built by using Power Apps, then just go for it and start doing. And after you have started, then you can figure out about these top 10 things you can mess up or to do some kind of wrongly. But the most important thing is that you have to start. And that was the motivation part of this session, and now we can move on. The first thing, or the biggest thing I have noticed people don't understand is the delegation. And the delegation is actually pretty dangerous one, because when you have delegation issues in your Power Apps, your Power Apps pretty often it still runs, and it seems to be work okay, but it might be that it isn't working okay at all anymore. And how you notice that you have delegation issue? That's pretty simple. You have this yellow triangle in your Canvas editor, and then you know that now I have delegation issue in my application. If you mouse hover that nice little yellow triangle, you get this message: delegation warning. The highlighted part of this formula might not work correctly with column blah 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 on large datasets. And this is kind of confusing. Something might not work correctly, and it might work correctly with large datasets. And what this large dataset means is these large datasets about 100 item or 1,000 item, 10,000 item, 1 million item. And actually, in this context, large datasets means by default 500 item. And from my point of view, 500 it's not large at all. Also, when you open a formula editor, you can see the part of the formula that is causing the delegation issue. It's always underlined with blue line. And now we see here we have this delegation issue in that part of the formula. But when you have this delegation warning, the most important thing is understand what it's all about, what this delegation thing is all about. And let's go that through shortly. And here I have my example. I have Canvas Power Apps that is used by mobile phone. It just have one gallery here, and inside the gallery it shows stores that are located in Helsinki. And all these stores are actually stored here in one SharePoint list, and there is 50,000 items, 50,000 stores stored here in SharePoint list. And now we like to show here stores that are located in Helsinki. And in our Power Apps, we do filter query inside these stores data storage. And we filter all the items by location column, and the location column value have to be exactly the Helsinki. And this filter query can be delegated to the SharePoint. And it means that SharePoint do this filtering here inside all these 50,000 items, and after it's ready, it returns all stores that are located in Helsinki. There is actually 5,000 hits. It returns those stores to the Power Apps, and after that we can do whatever we like to do inside gallery or whatever with these 5,000 stores, and everything is fine. But let's see, let's do almost the same thing, but now instead of filter query we do search, and we do search into the same data storage that is here in SharePoint, one list, and we do search, and we search string Helsinki inside the column location. And now this search query cannot be delegated to the SharePoint. And now actually we get that yellow triangle and warning that your Power Apps, your formula might not be working properly anymore on large datasets and blah, blah, blah. So this cannot be delegated to SharePoint. And what happens if it cannot be delegated? SharePoint cannot do the work. It cannot do the search for us. And it actually returns 500 first items of those 50,000 items to the Power Apps. And after that, we do, or Power Apps do this search query inside here in the Power Apps side, and it's using these 500 items it gets from SharePoint. And now we see the problem, because we know that there is 5,000 stores located in Helsinki, but now because of the delegation issue, we are actually dealing all the time only with the 500 top item of those whole dataset. And it might be that, inside these first 500 items, there is something between 0 to 500 stores located in Helsinki, but definitely we are dealing with the subset of the real items that are stored on our data storage. And that's about the delegation and why it's important and why it's kind of dangerous. And when you ever have this yellow triangle in your application, you have to first think that how many items we have now or we have in the future on that dataset. And if the number of items is more than 500 or actually more than 2,000, you can extend that number from 500 to 2,000. But if you have ever more items than that 2,000, then you have to start to get rid of those delegation issues. And there is a number of ways you can do that, but you have to understand what's the problem and what kind of problem you have, and can you ignore those delegation warnings. The next thing people are messing up, actually not the Power Apps maker. This is kind of more like a problem with organizations part. But and this might be sounds weird if you have Dynamics background. But for example, me, I have Office 365 background, and I work with people of that side. And usually when I start with the customer, most of the customers, they don't have any other environments on their tenant than default environment. And all the Power Apps and all the flows are built on default environment. And in these cases, you have to understand that this default environment, it's kind of special environment. And I usually call the default environment as a wild west environment, because everybody in the organization has maker permissions on default environment. Everybody can build Power Apps and flows in default environment. So usually the default environment, it's kind of full of all kind of training applications, or people have, goofing around and trying stuff there, and they didn't delete those experimental Power Apps and flows from there. And so definitely the default environment is not the place to put your actual production applications that are shared, and there's several people that are using those applications. Also, you have to be very, very careful with the SQL and blob connectors if you are using those in default environments, because these are implicitly shared connectors, and there is potential security risk with those connectors in default environment because everybody is maker there. So at least you have to have at least one other environment than default, usually production. Of course, you might have several production environments, and you might have several test and dev environments for those production environments, and so on. But at least you should have one production environment that is managed environment. There is only few app makers that can deploy and make solutions, apps and flows to that environment. And then you monitor that environment, and you can provide, for example, support for those applications that are placed on production environment. Just keep in mind, default environment is special environment and wild west environment. It's not the place to put your production applications. Next one is renaming controls. And we people, we are usually, most of the people like me are super lazy, and we build Power Apps, and they are pretty simple, and of course we know what's happening there, and we don't have to rename the controls. We know the stuff what is happening there. But please keep in mind that what happens when you have to make changes on those Power Apps, for example, after 1 year, or somebody else has to make some improvements or new features on your Power Apps, then it's much more easier to understand what's happening there if you have renamed all your controls. And you don't even have to figure out naming conventions by yourself, because Microsoft has published pretty nice white paper about Power Apps Canvas app coding standards and guidelines, and you find naming conventions what I usually use from there. But let's see these renaming controls a little bit in action. So what if you are super lazy and you don't want to rename all, please rename all. But for some reason you don't, just can't. There's few things you have to do. And first thing is that in many Power Apps, there is all kind of static elements. Like here, I have this gallery here, and then I have these labels, header labels on top of the gallery, just telling what the columns are. These are labels. I'm not referring those labels, those controls from anywhere. There's no formulas behind. There are no any functionality related to those ones. So just static labels. So this kind of stuff, please, if you don't rename those controls, you can always just group those and rename at least group. This is group headers for salary. And now your Power Apps is much more cleaner because these static elements is kind of inside the group. But the next one is a little bit more important, and like here I have form, order form built by Power Apps, and I have this approval required card here, and here is this toggle button here, and approval, this approval is needed, and we see here from the code it's needed when some data card value 22 is greater than 5,000. And the key thing is that if you ever refer your controls from the formula, then you have to rename those controls, because this might be much more longer formula, and it's super annoying to, or hard to understand what's happening there if these are these kind of general names with these controls. Of course, we can hit it now. We see that actually, okay, this is referring this order value. Okay, approval is required whenever order value is greater than 5,000. Makes sense. But why on earth we just didn't rename this control? And now when we hit this and look what's happening, we see immediately what is the logic behind the control. So all the controls you are using inside your formula, please rename those controls, because it makes it much more easier to understand the logic inside your formulas if you have renamed those controls. Okay, let's move on. And the next one is the formula editor. And why I like one is that I have noticed that plenty of Power Apps makers, they don't use all the features that formula editor provides us and makes our life much more easier, because the formula editor is the key tool when you build Power Apps. And let's open next screen here. And when I talk about formula editor, I mean this beauty here. So this place where you type all your long formulas. And the first thing, of course, is that you can open it. Yes, great. And you can resize it. Usually you might have long formulas and you need this space. It's much more easier to work with the formulas when you have space. Then you can access the different formulas or different properties of the controls. You can pick the property or event here, or you can see here. We have selected this Make Collection button. We can see all the properties here, but you can also navigate from here to the formula editor. So if you like to see what's the formula with the visible, just click the visible or border radius, or even you can click these X and Y width, height. You can click everything and it opens the corresponding stuff here in formula editor. This is quite easy way to navigate to the different properties. Then, if you have in some property, if you have formula behind it, not static value, you can see here it's grayed out, and if you click it, you can open it. And what is super cool and super useful is that you can highlight in your formula editor, you can highlight any part of the formula, like here user full name, and it shows here, okay, the current value of that part of the formula. It's Timo Pertilä, it's data type text. We can highlight this compensation here, and this is statement that has Boolean value, and it actually currently this highlight part is returning true. And we can of course highlight the whole thing, and we see that this whole thing is returning that display mode is edit. And this is very useful when you debug your application. You can highlight the parts of the formula and see what's inside on the different part of the formula at the moment. And then let's open here. You can auto-format these formulas. So there's format text and remove formatting links here. When you click the format text, it's auto-format your formula so that it's much more easier to understand and read the formula. In some cases, for example, here, if you build, for example, large collection here, static collection, then this auto-formatting might, make the code a little bit too long and too spacey. But usually, it makes it better and easier to understand if you use this auto-formatting functionality. But I actually use these auto-formatting features all the time because, for example, if we open here our application on start, there's nothing that tells us there's something wrong with that. But now we see, when we open this application on start, we see that these auto-formatting features are disabled. And now we actually see immediately that there is some syntax error in the code. Because of course, if there's some syntax error, then the Power Apps cannot do the auto-formatting because there's some, errors on the syntax. And this is kind of habit for me that every time I click anything here, I usually first look these texts because then I see immediately if there's some syntax error on my code. This is actually pretty handy and useful feature also. Then one thing is this: whenever you have these red arrow symbols, then please do mouse over and Power Apps tells some kind of error message what is happening there. And sometimes they are very useful, sometimes they are not so useful, but usually you should start with reading those errors because it might help you to understand what's happening in your code. And also, if you click here, sometimes they are hidden, like here you can see that here is error message, and if I put my mouse there, I see there's unaccepted charges. So this time I missed one character, and now it's everything fine. And we see this. Now we can format the code also. Yes, and one more thing about the formulator is the colors. Here we can see that this formula is also color coded. So the function is shown as blue. 10 collections, data sources, and constants are shown as green. Then the code itself is with black. 10 integers, booleans, strings are with red, and screens are shown this kind of highlighted. And also, what's cool that we can preview what's inside these collections, and we can preview also what's inside our data source. But about this color coding, it might be helpful when we have some errors also, like here. We notice that there is some problem with this formula. And what we are doing with this formula, we are refreshing data source, and after that we are adding with patch function, we are adding new items to that data source. We do for all with this collection having few items, and then with each item we do the patch to these same demo orders with these values. But we see that there's plenty of errors on that formula. And this is kind of confusing because we know that the syntax is definitely this is correct. It should be working, but now for some reason there is error and it's not working. And we get hint about what is wrong with this formula by looking these colors, because we notice here we refresh these demo orders data storage here, and demo orders is shown with green color, and then we do patch to that same demo order, but for some reason these demo orders here is shown as black, not with green as it should be. So it's for some reason it doesn't recognize that this demo orders is data source, and the reason for that is this collection. If we look here where we do the collection, we have this call new orders collection, and tada, we have column with same name than we have the data storage. So, and of course, when we are doing this for all loop here and do the patch, these demo orders here is actually now referring the column inside the collection because it's kind of near. And these kind of naming conflicts we can solve easily because Power Apps has this notation, and with this notation we can force Power Apps to use, if there's object with same name, we can force the Power Apps to use the object on the global level. And of course, in global level, they cannot be objects with same names. And now we are actually forcing this patch command to use not the column inside the collection, but the same named data source called demo orders. And now everything is fine and it's fixed. And this is something that might be hard to find out what's the problem if you don't look actually the colors of those elements of your formula. The next thing people are Canvas apps are the licenses. And every time I give a presentation or somebody else give a presentation about Power Apps or Power Platform and mention licenses, the people, somebody on the audience start to laugh. And it's kind of sad because this licensing stuff is when you look at first it look very simple, but when you go to the details it's something totally different than easy. But you have to understand a little bit about licensing, because it's not so cool if you let's say you build some Power Apps and you have, for example, 100 or 200 users for that Power Apps, and then when you are ready, then somebody else notices, okay, this is nice, we need this one, but you are using these premium connectors, and it means that, okay, now every user, these 200 users, they need to have a Power App per app plan, and we don't have that money. And it isn't nice to figure out at the end of the project. You should spend a little bit time when you start building stuff at what kind of features we will have now, and maybe what kind of features we will have in the future, and figure out do this have some kind of license impact? Because people usually they are not so happy if this license stuff is revealed at the end of the project, not in the beginning of the project. And the funny thing is that in many cases the information about this licensing impact it's there. For example, here when I do this Canvas app and I add SQL Server connection, then if I just look at this diamond and it clearly tells that Power Apps per user plan or Power Apps per app plan will be required during playback for apps with this connector. So the information is usually there, but we don't read that. Of course, it's kind of how we work. Not so much about the licensing, but the next thing is the mobile usage. and these Canvas apps, they are super cool, useful, and easy way to build mobile applications for the users. That's I think the number one what I do with the Power Apps. But there's a thing. If you start to build Power Apps that is used by phones, then first thing you should do is to figure out what kind of phones your end users actually have. Because usually consultants have their shiny new phones and everything is working very smoothly. But in real life, in real organization, it might be that your end users actually have a little bit old phones, a little bit low-cost model phones. And with those phones, it might happen that when they run your Power Apps, they actually run out of the memory and your Power Apps will be super slow. And for that reason, when you start to build Power Apps that are used by phones, then figure out what kind of phones your end user have. And if they have those old crappy phones, then you should have one of those crappy phones for yourself. And all the time you are developing the Power Apps, you should test with that crappy phones how your Power Apps is actually running with that phone. When it starts to, or if it starts to run slowly, then you know that now you have reached the limit and you have to somehow make it faster. You have to, for example, start to limit number of the controls, number of the screens, number of the functionality you have there. You have plenty of ways to make it smoother, but now you at least you know when you have to start to do that stuff. So that's the lessons about mobile usage. These are promoted as a tool for mobile applications, but if you have real life use and old phones, you have to prepare yourself. Next one is copy pasting the code, and this is something I see a lot. Okay, here is my sample application. This is the same new order form we just looked before, and it works so that if the order value is greater than 5,000, then approval required turns on, and actually this approver email appears to here in our application. And now somebody create new requirements so that actually this description field also should be shown only when approval is required for this order. And how the most of the people do this, they just find out, okay, here is the code. This approval is required when this something is greater than 5,000. We copy that code and go to this description card and open the visible and put it here. So now the description field is visible only when this order value is greater than 5,000. And yes, it of course it works. Or it doesn't work now. What I did wrong. Wrong. Yes. I just didn't know how big number I put there. So now it's working. But we just copy paste the business logic from one place to other place. So if in the future somebody says that okay, now we actually has changed this approval logic that this approval is required whenever these orders values are greater than 1,000. And now we have this business logic here and the same business logic copied here. And we have now two places where we have to make the update. But instead of copy pasting this logic, we can always use these existing controls. So for example, here we have this approval required card here, and this toggle works here. So we can use that one. And instead of copying the business logic, we can use the existing logic like here. So now we are referring here that when this description card is visible whenever this approval required value here is true. And this is working just in the same way, but now we have keep the business logic here in behind the one control, and we are just referring that control from here. And when you are building forms, it's a very common case that you like to show and hide different parts of the form in some situations. And for example, what you should do in that case, I put it here. For example, is this approver email is working already, and now we like to change that this description field, its visibility is same than this approver email card. Then we just can refer to it. So now I say here in description card that my visibility is always the same as this approver email visibility, and this approver email visibility is actually bind to this approval required toggle here. And now it also works nicely. That. But you can always make reference to the other controls. So please don't copy paste your business logic from one place to every other place. You can put it in one place, and after that just refer to the end results from the other controls. And that's the most common scenario. And then you have also a situation that you have big bunch of code. For example, you have two buttons. You have save button, and it do all kind of stuff behind the save, and then you have save and close button, and it do all the same, but after that it's doing all the same save procedures, it close the screen. And in this kind of situation, we have all kinds of workarounds. Usually we use buttons, hidden buttons, where we can encapsulate the logic. But the good news is that we can actually, during this month, it will be in public preview that we can make reusable components so that we can actually put the business logic behind the components. And it for me it actually means that now wow, we can actually build reusable functions finally. And this is huge because now we can really stop the copy pasting the code from, for example, from different buttons. We can encapsulate all the business logic to the component and use it from there. And this is super nice. Next thing, people when they start to build these Power Apps, what they're messing up is these forms and especially form modes. And usually when somebody asks help from me, so that I have this form, but in some situation, this form, it start to behave very strange way. And the most of the cases is that the problem is that form mode and the maker hasn't fully understand how this form mode is working. Let's see that one next. So here I have a gallery here, and this gallery is binded to the demo orders data source, and then we have form, and this form is also binded to the same data source. And we can click that one. We can pick the one from the gallery, and we can make updates and save them. And then we can make new orders also, and so on. Very basic thing. And these forms, they have this one key property that is mode. And usually forms are by default in edit mode, then it can be in new mode when you are creating new items, and then there's the view mode if you just like to view item. And when we have this form in edit mode, then we of course have to know what item we are editing. And for example, here in my example, I have this one variable selected item, and we are always editing this selected item, and it actually initials here. So whenever I click this edit button, it may update context variable, this was selected item, and put this whole item to that variable so that we can edit it here. So everything is fine. And now we have edit few items. Yeah, yes. And then we like to create new one. And hit save. And for some reason, it randomly opens up some totally different order here after the created new one. And this is the key thing what make confuse the new app makers. And this is actually pretty obvious, because when you create new item, this form is in form mode new, but right after you save it, it's not new anymore, and it changes this form mode from new to edit. And when it's in edit mode, then it needs to know what item we are editing, and we have actually put it there in the code here. And actually, it's not random item that opens after the save. It always the last item we have accessed from that list. But this is super simple example, but it is much more complicated if you have these, this gallery and this form in separate screens. You might have in your screen several different forms that are somehow attached to each other. You might have some hidden forms and so on and so on, and the whole thing might be complex. And those scenarios, if one of your forms start to behaving badly, it usually just because that particular form in your application in that time, it isn't in that form mode that you have been expected. And always when people have problems with these forms, I start with putting some debugging label on that screen, just showing that in which mode the form is currently, and then now it's not edit, it's in new form, then I put it back and hit say, we know, okay, now it's changed it to edit mode again. And then I can confirm that all the forms are in state that AppMaker has been designed. But this form mode is actually one thing that is confusing a lot of makers when they start to build these applications. And the last thing people are messing up with Power Platform is that we have to keep in mind that this Power Apps flow and the whole Power Platform is evolving very, very fast. And it means that, for example, if you got some requirement before the summer and you do your homework and study and make the conclusion that okay, these kind of requirements we cannot implement these by using Power Apps, and that's fine. But you have to remember that if you get now after the summer same kind of requirements, you cannot make a short conclusion that it cannot be built by Power Apps because you do the homework before the summer, because so many things might be changed during the 6 months that you actually have to do your homework again, or you have to all the times follow up what's happening in this Power Platform space. And it's kind of, some people like this kind of evolving, that things are changing fast. There will be new features and existing features will have updates, and some people actually they don't like this kind of tools at all. But you just keep in mind that if it isn't possible yesterday, it can be possible today, in a nutshell. So last summary, top 10 mistakes in my presentation is at first, the biggest one, you skip the whole Power Apps thing. Second one is you are not understanding what the delegation is all about. Third one is placing all your applications in the default environment. Fourth, not renaming any controls. Number 5, non-efficient using of the formula editor. 6, having no idea about the licensing. 7, building too heavy apps for too old phones. Number 8, copy-pasting the code inside the app. Number 9, not understanding the form mode. And number 10, not following the change on the platform or the new features of the Power Apps. And that's my list for you. And that's all. It was my pleasure to be here. I'm very sorry I mess up a little bit and I didn't turn on my camera. But thank you all.